My name is Ross. I'm a reference librarian at the Amelia branch, and today we'll be discussing the often overlooked history of one of Clermont County's most prominent features, East Fork Lake, more properly known as the William H. Harsha Lake and Dam. Assisting me in research and in this presentation is David Hawkins, who dove deep into the archives but came back in all one piece. The Ohio River has always been an important artery for trade, even before the arrival of the Europeans. Beginning in the late 18th and early 19th century, these settlers began their westward migration. The river provided a quick and safe route for travel. Transportation of goods by river was cheap. It also determined patterns of settlement. Cities flourished along the Ohio such as Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Louisville, and St. Louis. While we think of the Ohio as being a broad and deep river, this was not always so. During the 1800s, the depth of the river varied. There were occasional floods, but at other times the river was only a foot or two deep. Beginning in 1878, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began building a system of wicket dams to bring the river up to a consistent height. One example is Shiloh Lock 34, which was completed in 1925, and another example is the Meldal Dam, which began its operations in 1964.
The Little Miami River begins in the country around Springfield and flows south to meet the Ohio. The East Fork originates around the Clinton-Highland County line, flowing through the far northern part of Brown County past Fayetteville and into Clermont County at Williamsburg. We then reach the area that would become the location of the lake. The river then flows through Batavia and Parentown. At Milford, it meets the Little Miami. The now conjoined rivers roughly follow the Clermont-Hamilton County line, emptying into the Ohio around the suburb of California.
Perhaps the most catastrophic flood on the Ohio occurred in 1937. Record rainfall, coupled with melting snow, brought the waters to 80 feet, which was 28 feet above flood stage. It would take 11 days for the waters to recede back to that level. Cincinnati wasn't the only place which was affected. Flooding happened all along the length of the Ohio. There were 385 deaths from this event, with a total cost of $500 million.
While the 1937 flood was a disaster, it did provide the impetus for projects to prevent future flooding and to control the Ohio River. In June of 1938, the Flood Control Act was passed. The Ohio River Basin as well as the Miami River were mentioned alongside other river systems in need of infrastructural improvements. The projects that would become Caesars Creek and East Fork Lake find their genesis here. $75 million is appropriated for reservoirs and $50 million for flood control.
Between the years 1940 and 1949, there was little change in the status of the projects which had been outlined in the 1938 Flood Control Act. The June 12, 1949 edition of the Cincinnati Enquirer included a map of a proposed dam system on the Little Miami and East Fork rivers. If you look closely, you'll also see two other projects, Todd Fork and Xenia. These dams were not realized. According to the Enquirer, these projects were to begin soon. And this is what the newspaper had to say about the projects. Lying as it does in the glacial area within gravel deposits, the construction of the reservoir and the increased low water flow are expected to aid to a considerable extent the groundwater level of the Little Miami River system. Nevertheless, work did not get underway for almost another 2 decades.
The post-war era saw unprecedented growth in U.S. population and economy. Clermont County was no exception. In 1950, there were a little over 42,000 residents. By 1980, that number tripled to 128,000. This was the era of the suburbs. The pressures of increased population and a need for infrastructure likely drove part of the decision to build the East Fork Lake Dam. It was necessary to link the county with the greater Cincinnati area and the rest of the state. For example, the construction of I-275 Loop began in 1961.
The post-war boom brought about a growing awareness of the effects that humankind was having upon the environment. Industrial progress left pollution in its wake. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, published in 1962, exposed the dangers of the pesticide DDT. This marks the beginning of the modern environmental movement. The growth of suburbs and industry also concerned conservationists, who were afraid that wilderness areas would no longer exist. In April 1956, the Sierra Club effectively protested the building of the Echo Park Dam in Utah. Concerns such as these and the success of some of these campaigns would fuel opposition to the construction of East Fork Lake.
In 1963, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced that it was going to construct a series of dams and reservoirs in southwest Ohio and southeastern Indiana. This was the beginning of the projects outlined in 1949. In April 1966, Mary Hemingway, the widow of Ernest Hemingway, visited East Fork River Valley. She said that she would help block the building of the dam and instead would like to see the land developed into a national park. She mentions that she does not want to see the natural beauty of the area be reduced to mudflats. An article from May 12, 1966, Cincinnati Enquirer, mentions that some people oppose the dam because it would mean the loss of native artifacts. Although there are likely to be such artifacts under the lake now, the mound on the proposed dam site was preserved. You can still visit Elk Lick Mound today. Later that month, the Clermont Sun unveiled plans for East Fork under the banner, "Ohio Plans Biggest Park Here." Besides trails and camping areas, facilities such as an overnight lodge, vacation cabins, a full-service marina, and a nature study area are planned for the new park. Included in the issue is a map of the project. Another article mentions that the county commissioners have given their full support. Reasons given were to provide work for the unemployed, secure clean water for future development, and to attract industry. May 17th Enquirer reports that most people and businesses recommend putting up the dam. It could lead to an economic boom. This in spite of the loss of farmland and tax revenue. In October 1966, the courts decided against a local levy to raise funds for the project. A month earlier, the House Appropriations Committee had given the go-ahead to allocate $500,000 for the East Fork project.
On the 11th of May 1967, William Harsha, Ohio State Representative, supported further funding from the state for the construction of both East Fork and Cedar Creek dams. This may have been due in part to the aforementioned rejection of a levy. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers convened a meeting in June of that year, not to ask for support, but instead to explain to the landowners in the East Fork Valley how their lands would be taken from them. This is a perfect example of the concept of eminent domain, where the government reserves the right to confiscate land from private individuals for public use with just compensation. The first of these expropriations occurred in September 1967. At around the same time, concerns regarding the environment and conservation, as well as complaints about land confiscations and the utility of the East Fork project, would coalesce into the opposition movement. Doubts swirled around water control projects. The Corps Engineers report from 1968 noted that although the East Fork and Cedar Creek projects will prevent flooding, it would not do away with the menace once and for all. Indeed, they stated that it should be realized that the greater Little Miami floods can occur in the future, which would flood even more area. These can reasonably be expected to be flooded again in the future, and a flood even greater and more destructive than any previous flood. Issues such as these called into question the motives for the project. In December 1969, 5 landowners filed a suit against the Corps of Engineers. They charged the Corps of acting in bad faith as to the true purpose of the dam and lake. Flooding had never been an issue in the East Fork River Valley. Indeed, less than $1 million worth of damages had occurred in the previous century. Instead, those filing the suit believed the sole purpose of the dam was recreation, and were hiding this from those who had had their land seized. Nevertheless, work continued on the dam. In time, over 160 families would be relocated, with a loss of around 100 homes. Historical landmarks would be destroyed, such as the founder of Elk Lick's home and Andrew Pinkham's farm, which had been on the National Registry. The Slade House, which was also the home of Thomas Morris, has been located at Heritage Park in Sharonville. However, mines from the short-lived gold rush that occurred in Clermont County in the late 1860s were destroyed in the building of the dam. Meanwhile, other construction projects were underway in the late 1960s. State routes 32 and 125 were expanded from being two-lane highways. Work on the local airport began in earnest. Claremont College and Mercy Claremont were in their planning stages.
Meanwhile, there were those who questioned the cost of such progress. There was growing concern about the impact that humankind was having on its home. As a result, environmental issues became front and center in some facets of American life in the late 1960s and 1970s. In 1963, Congress passed the Clean Air Act. The purpose of this bill was to set air quality standards and practices for the mitigating of air pollution. It provided for federal funding for research to improve air quality. Space exploration brought the fragility of life into focus. William Anders aboard Apollo 8 snapped what's perhaps the most iconic image of the environmental movement, called Earthrise, taken from orbit around the moon. April 22, 1970 was the first Earth Day, which brought nationwide awareness to environmental conservation. In 1972, the Club of Rome published Limits to Growth, which posited that, quote, the Earth's interlocking resources, the global system of nature in which we all live, probably cannot support present rates of economic and population growth much beyond the year 2100, if that long, even with advanced technology, end quote. At the same time, James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis formulated the Gaia hypothesis, which envisaged the Earth as one large self-regulating organism. This implies that any meddling in the natural order can only upset this delicate balance.
Pressure from the concerned public led to the drafting of new legislation to preserve the environment. October 1968 brought the creation of a national wild and scenic river system to preserve certain rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition for the enjoyment of present and future generations. Congressman Harsha, with the assistance of other Ohio representatives, were able to exempt the East Fork and its tributaries from protection under the bill. The National Environmental Policy Act, which we'll call NEPA from here on out, passed in 1969 and stipulated that all federal construction projects must first undertake environmental assessments and make an environmental impact statement prior to work commencing. Whether or not this act was followed properly would become a major legal point of contention in the story of the East Fork Dam. Issues of water pollution came front and center when the Cuyahoga River burst into flames in June 1969. Interestingly enough, this was the 10th time since the 1860s that a conflagration had occurred. However, with contemporary fears about pollution, the incident reached nationwide consciousness. Earnest attempts were made to clean the Cuyahoga and neighboring Lake Erie. Many of these projects proved successful. On December 2nd, 1972, the Environmental Protection Agency was established. Also that year, Congress passed the Clean Water Act to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters.
Construction of the dam began. Groundbreaking was on July 23rd. Present were Governor Rhodes, congressmen including Harsha, a state representative, members of the Corps of Engineers, county commissioners, and the president of the Little Miami River Development Commission.
In October 1971, another federal district judge, upon examining complaints, stated that the Army Corps of Engineers must follow the NEPA. A writ of possession could not be obtained until compliance was shown. Later that month, the county commissioners wrote Representative Harsha with concerns about drainage. There had been proposed designs for a super sewer. This was to be a 10-mile sewer pipe that would run from Williamsburg to Batavia and prevent pollution from accumulating in the future East Fork Lake. However, agencies that were approached could not provide preventative help. Why this was the case, we were unable to find in the articles. At any rate, the commissioners wrote, "We feel that since the federal government has created the problem, making it impossible to use the natural drainage, which usually are the economic routes for sewers, and at the same time taking 12,000 acres of some of the best farming land of the county out of our tax base, some agency should be authorized to render aid for preventative purposes to be paid for by the government." Later in the year, the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Planning Authority shot down another proposal for the super sewer. The commissioners would continue to advocate for its building, but it would not be realized.
Meanwhile, opposition to the project continued to organize. In November 1971, the East Fork Preservation Society, led by Paul McCarthy, enlisted the help of Ralph Nader's Public Interest Action Group, known as Nader's Raiders. They charged that the Corps was in violation of the Environmental Policy Act, as well as not being approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, the President's Environmental Quality Control Council, and the Corps' own environmental agency.
A counterpoint of sorts also appeared in the same edition of the Clermont Sun as this news. In an op-ed piece, a reader notes that the East Fork River Valley has become acres of garbage, junk refrigerators, stoves, and a variety of other debris. While the author did see the potential for pollution in creating the lake, they believed that arrangements could be made to prevent this problem. Instead, the author enjoined civic-minded readers to organize cleaning crews to restore the valley to a pristine state before the water begins to fill the reservoir. They say, let's give them something beautiful to remember. In spite of setbacks, the work continued through 1972. Up next is a picture of one of East Fork's most salient landmarks, the control tower, under construction.
Continued pressure was put on the government to fund the super sewer. The Corps of Engineers continued to push back, stating that such a project would be appropriated for only if a need was found after the dam was completed. The County Board of Commissioners, in a letter from September, complained that, quote, we feel the Corps of Engineers have failed to give assurance in their environmental impact statement that the East Fork Reservoir will not be polluted, nor have they provided long-range assurance that it will not become another Lake Erie, end quote. McCarthy's case against the dam was brought to the Subcommittee of Public Works of the Senate Committee in May. The attorney representing him in the Preservation Society once again charged that the Corps was non-compliant. Instead, it was proposed that the work on the dam cease and that it be taken apart, which would cost $175,000. The land should then be turned into a park. There was at present enough water available to support the population. However, quote, the East Fork Reservoir is not being built to satisfy projected water needs. Rather, these needs are being created by the project itself, end quote. In other words, the building of the reservoir would attract a population boom.
On July 19, 1973, District Judge Timothy Hogan ordered that all earth moving at East Fork and Caesars Creek be temporarily stopped. A suit had been filed by the Ohio Attorney General against the Corps. Once again, the crux of the matter was NEPA. The Assistant Attorney General charged that the Corps' environmental impact statement was the shortest and most incomplete impact statement ever filed by a federal agency. State Senator William Mussey accused this move as being a politically motivated attempt to take money from projects in southern Ohio and use it for projects in the more populous north. Judge Rubin's ruling on this case came out in August. Taking into account the habitat change that would occur as the result of creating a artificial stillwater lake, it was treated as complete that the work would continue. And I quote, while the plaintiff may be successful in limited these projects, it is not equally clear that the plaintiff will enjoy ultimate success, unquote. The judge noted the environmental impact statement in 1971, but that was below 1973 standards. Therefore, the Corps was mandated to provide a new comprehensive statement. Work up until this point, Rubin said, had no further significant environmental damage. However, until the impact statement was filed, clear cutting, brush, and topsoil removal, as well as the building and closing of roads, had to cease.
That report came in April 1974. Colonel Fiala of the Corps of Engineers stated in a cost-benefit analysis that the benefits of the dam outweighed abandoning work currently in progress. The dam would provide flood protection, a recreational area, and a new supply of water. To quit the project would also entail the creation of new plans, which would complicate matters. However, Fiala also mentioned that water quality would be less than optimum due to runoff. This problem would be ameliorated by a regional sewage network. Subsequently, on May 23rd, the injunction was lifted. Work resumed on the dam and reservoir.
The economic development of Clermont County continued apace. The University of Cincinnati Clermont College opened in 1972. Mercy Hospital was completed the next year. In December 1974, work commenced on Eastgate Mall. The influx of new people and the need to create industry and infrastructure in the county became a prime concern. The East Fork Reservoir was considered by many to be the solution to increased water needs. There was also some reprieve for the defenders of the dam when in February 1976, the state finally dropped its lawsuit.
However, environmental issues continued to be a prime concern for opponents of the dam. In 1976, the city of Cincinnati filed an amicus curiae brief. This brief stated that the reservoir would cause a marked reduction in water quality due to pollution from agricultural runoff. As a representative of Rivers Unlimited explained, quote, "In effect, you are fertilizing the lake. You then get green algae that grow or thrive in such nourishment." End quote. The city and environmental groups wanted the Corps to undertake a study of how to reduce such harmful inflow. If that could not be done, then the EPA should do it. A report filed earlier that year by Bulk Engineering, an independent company, proposed building a wastewater treatment plant that would serve the area. However, if the East Fork Dam would create a flow of 15 cubic feet per second, a cheaper, smaller plant could be built. According to the environmental impact study that was completed in 1974, East Fork would have a flow of 2 cubic feet per second at the very least. The Corps of Engineers responded by pledging to an outflow of 15 feet per second, but not making any guarantees. This issue was taken up by a Senate subcommittee in the next year. Druce Riley of Rivers Unlimited wanted Congress to order the Corps to control the flow and keep it at 15 cubic feet per second under all conditions. A suit filed in March 1977 charged that the contract to construct the project between the state and federal government was in violation of the Ohio Constitution, which stated that funds for projects could not exceed $750,000. However, legislation in the form of a state Senate joint resolution cleared the state of wrongdoing by setting new standards for funding.
The June 23, 1977 issue of the Clermont Sun reported that the parks surrounding the dam and reservoir were 20% complete. Nevertheless, it appeared as though the end was in sight. A grand opening was scheduled for 1978. In the next week's issue, there were highlights of a tour by the County Chamber of Commerce to the construction site. Here are some photos from that article and others.
On August 12, 1978, East Fork Lake State Park was finally dedicated. Amongst the VIPs were Governor Rhodes and Congressman Harsha. Rhodes gave a speech in which he lauded the representative's prime role in the project. He also congratulated J.E. Carnahan, whose Little Miami Valley Development Association had been integral in getting support. Carnahan expressed that he never expected the project to take 20 years. Harsha also made a speech in which he praised the dam's manifold benefits: flood control, a source of water, and recreation. Of special mention was that Ford's decision to build a plant in Batavia was due in part to the building of the dam and reservoir. The congressman believed that by 1980 there would be nearly 2 million visitors to the park. By 2025 he expected 3 million visitors. The park would be finished in 1979 and have its first full season.
Following the opening of East Fork Lake, Governor Rhodes proposed spending an additional $10 to $15 million for a lodge and recreational complex in the park. This did not come to fruition. In 1996, an intake tower was built. Water is taken from the lake and sent to a nearby water purification plant that provides drinking water for nearby communities.
Nevertheless, there have been environmental issues which have marred East Fork's reputation as a recreation getaway. Harmful algae blooms have occurred throughout the last decade. These have the potential to cause grave illness in humans and animals. Health advisories stating that swimming in the lake is at one's own risk have been posted. But the situation is far from hopeless. One way of preventing algae blooms is to capture agricultural runoff, which is rich in the fertilizers that feed the algae. This summer, the County Board of Commissioners contracted Sustainable Streams of Louisville to plant a wetland on the Williamsburg side of the lake. Wetlands have been proven to remove nutrient-rich runoff from water. No news yet as to the progress of the project.
Today, the state park is home to miles of trails for hikers and bridle paths for horses, and their humans, of course. Natural features and a diversity of life abound. According to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, animals of the area include eastern plains garter snake, fence lizard, red fox, deer, raccoon, Canada geese, song sparrow, eastern meadowlark, and the barn swallow. There are habitats here that are rare in Ohio. For example, prairie lands that once covered a substantial part of the state. There is a large campground with some modern amenities. There are places for picnicking, including shelters. Fishing is a popular activity, and there are places where hunting is permitted at different times of the year. Of course, visitors like to bask on the beach or on a boat. And in recent years, East Fork has been a host to the U.S. Rowing Club National Championships. The spillway is an excellent place to go fossil hunting. Take it from me. Watching. We greatly appreciate it, and it is our hope that you have found this interesting and informative. Here's a short list of library materials that you might be interested in if you'd like to know more about this county's history. First of all, Clermont County Public Library has a subscription to Ancestry, the premier genealogical database. It is available only in our branches, however. On the other hand, we have other databases that are similar in content that you can access from home. One of the sources that we drew upon for this presentation was our database of Cincinnati Enquirer issues. It covers the newspaper from its founding in 1841 until 2009. Excellent for research or just browsing. I found out that another big source of our research material was found at our Genealogical Society's library, which is ensconced in the Batavia branch. we maintain a microfilm collection of back issues of the Clermont Sun and other papers from the county. And then finally, a good introduction to the history of the county is Historic Clermont County by Ron Hill and Patsy Shively. Once again, thanks for watching. Farewell and be well.